Thank you for joining us today for our seminar in the Journey to Science series at Onondaga Community College. This seminar is sponsored by the Bridges to Baccalaureate grant, and this semester we are hosting a total of 6 speakers in STEM and STEM-related fields. Today we are welcoming Dr. Danielle Berry. Danielle graduated from OCC in 2013 with her associate's degree in math and science. After OCC, she transferred to SUNY ESF, where she earned a bachelor's degree in environmental chemistry. After she graduated, she worked as an industrial hygiene technician for 1 year, but she ended up missing academics and missing the lab, and she returned to school. She then completed her PhD in organic chemistry at the University of Texas earlier this year. Danielle now works at the Dow Chemical company in Michigan. Now, as Danielle shares her journey with us, if you have any questions, for those of you watching live, there's a Q&A button at the top, and you can submit your questions at any time, and we will cover them at the end. Danielle, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us. Let's welcome Dr. Danielle Berry.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lucy, for that introduction. That was great. And thank you to everybody who's watching. I'm so excited to be able to speak to you guys. As a former CSTEP student and student of OCC myself, I've sat through a lot of these seminars and they were always very motivating to me. So I hope I can motivate you and shed some light on any questions you may have. Please feel free to ask me anything. I'm an open book. So to get started, I will just kind of walk you through the details a little bit of that introduction that Lacey gave. And to start off with, I am going to take you back a little bit before my college days. So I grew up in Syracuse, New York. I was born and raised on the South Side, and I was actually homeschooled. And during that time, I had zero interest in science. I was totally into music and musical theater and all of these different things. But my mom put me in this like after school robotics program. In that class, I was not super excited to be there at the beginning, but it was hosted by LSAMP at Syracuse University, and there were students there and faculty who kind of mentored us kids. And while I was in that program, that's when I really started to develop a love for like the scientific process and just the technology that's involved and all of the different things you can do. Also, while I was there, I had a really great mentor. His name was Louis Romo, and he was at the time an undergraduate student, but he really inspired me to kind of pursue science and see where I could go. So when I was 16, I was kind of finished with my high school coursework, so I started at OCC. This was not uncommon for my family. Both my brother and my sister kind of took the same route, so I followed in their footsteps. And while I was at OCC, my first semester, I was undeclared, just taking my normal classes that, you know, your core courses everyone needs. And that's when I joined the CSTEP program. So my first semester, my GPA was, I think, around a 2. It wasn't super great. And when I joined CSTEP, they said, hey, Danielle, you know, we think you're really talented, we think you're bright, but you can do so much better. So you should try. Let's challenge you to, you know, really apply yourself and see where you can go. And while I was in the CSTEP program, they encouraged me to participate in summer research. That was something I had never heard of before. I didn't know undergrads could do it. They showed me a couple of programs that through LSAMP, you know, you could apply to. And so I applied to one in chemistry and one in physics just to see what would happen. And I got accepted to the program in chemistry. So I was in a lab at Syracuse University with her name is Dr. Karen Roulant. And she accepted me into her lab, and this was the summer after my freshman year at OCC. So that was pretty uncommon. I hadn't taken any type of organic chemistry courses. I wasn't well versed in chemistry, but she gave me a chance to do research and, you know, kind of get my hands dirty. And what I realized after the program was that that same mentor that I had, Louis, when I was 15, he saw my name in the application pool and he said, hey, I know this girl. I know that she's now interested in science. Let's give her a chance. So I learned very early on the importance of networking and just how building relationships with people really can help you be able to excel and kind of explore other opportunities. So that's one key point of advice I have. No matter who you meet, just, you know, try to make a good impression, be kind to people, and, you know, build your network. Start that now. So after that, I went back to OCC and I was starting my second year of school. That's when I decided, hey, I really like chemistry. The program over the summer was super fun. I want to do a chemistry program. And at that point, I had looked into the 2+2 agreements, I believe they're called, that OCC has with various universities. And this was super, super important. So by looking into those and kind of deciding where I wanted to go early on, I was able to tailor my courses in that last year to meet the requirements for my school so I could stay on track. So in that time, I decided that I wanted to go to SUNY ESF. I thought that it would be a really great school. It had, small class sizes compared to professors. You definitely got more of a one-on-one with people. And for me, that was really important so that I could get the best education that would work for me. So while I was there, in that time, in my last semester or my last year at OCC, I actually got to attend the C-STEP conference, which if any of you guys have been there or if you've heard about it, it's this really great science conference. It's up in the Adirondacks. It's at, I think it's on Lake George. And at this conference, you get to see what other people have done. So you get to see about their summer research. You get to learn more about science, and it's at a very nice resort. It's fancy. It's just a great experience. And that was really important for me because this was the first time I really got to participate in one of these type of conferences. And if you pursue the sciences, you'll soon learn that conferences are super important and there will be many that you will attend in your career. So having that experience early on was also really helpful for me. Once I finished that, I transferred to SUNY ESF, where I decided to pursue environmental chemistry. And ESF was really unique in the fact that after you complete your undergraduate courses, you start to take graduate level courses in your senior year. Now that was challenging, that was very challenging, but it definitely made me more competitive as a student. It gave me a little bit of insight into what graduate coursework looked like, and it definitely gave me confidence to be able to pursue a higher level degree. So I had a really great experience there in doing research. I was in several labs at ESF. I did biogeochemistry, which was kind of looking at the different things that like fish and marine life would take in and analyze what their eating habits were to understand their environment. I also worked in an organic chemistry lab where I did a lot of synthesis, which is what I love. And the last lab that I was in was more of an analytical chemistry lab. So by having all of those experiences and, kind of seeing what different branches of chemistry exist, I was kind of able to understand what I did like and what I didn't like so much. So after that, I graduated from SUNY ESF, and I my last semester was tough. I had lost a family member, my grandfather. I kind of lost motivation in my courses. I was not doing so well. I actually ended up failing one course in my last semester. I was able to talk to my advisor. My advisor worked it out with the professor that I could retake it over the summer. So I was still able to graduate in the correct year. So that's the second point of advice. Advisors, they can be great. And if you're open with them and you really communicate your needs, then things can work out. So that summer, I finished up my summer research. I retook my course and I passed, but because I was delayed a little bit, I missed the application deadlines for grad school. So at that point, I was like, well, do I want to apply late and see what happens, or do I want to get a job? So I ended up getting a job. So I worked in East Syracuse at a place called Colden Corporation, where they do occupational health and safety. And so what that means is when you go into a workplace, especially if you're working with chemicals, you can breathe a lot of things that are toxic. There's environmental hazards, there's safety hazards. And so what my job is to go to those different client sites and say, hey, I want to test your breathing zone. I want to make sure that you're not getting injured or harmed by your workplace. So I would go, I would test several people, I would take detailed notes on them, go back to my office, analyze the data, and then provide reports to help them protect their employees. So that was a very interesting experience. I got to travel all around the upstate New York region and all the way down to Virginia. So that was very cool. But while I was there, I was working in a lot of places where I saw people in the lab and they were doing the chemistry that I loved. And I decided that while my job was a good job, it paid me well, and I was doing well, I wanted to go back. I wanted to challenge myself academically. I wanted to move forward in my career, and I didn't want to just do that as a technician. So after a year of that job, I applied to graduate school at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I was accepted, which was awesome. And so I went down there in the fall of 2016. And that was a huge change for me. I lived my entire life in upstate New York, and now I'm moving halfway across the country to Texas. So that was a little bit of a culture shock. I definitely didn't miss winters in Syracuse, so that was a plus that I didn't have to deal with the snow. But being at that school, it gave me a lot of independence. And that was really important because when you start to pursue higher level education, it becomes very independent. Your work is on you. My graduate advisor, Dr. Smaldone, whose lab I worked in, the first day that I got there, he said, your PhD is yours. It's not mine to get, it's yours to get. So you set your hours, you come in, you do the work that you want to do, and whether you succeed or not, it falls on you. And I think that's true for pretty much any level of education. Once you are out of high school, it's up to you if you want to succeed or not, as long as you're going out and getting the help you need and applying yourself and really trying, it's your degree to have. So while I was at school in Texas, I worked in a lab where we worked with organic synthesis. So I was still doing organic chemistry, but this lab was really interesting because we worked with materials for 3D printing. So if you've ever seen 3D printing, it's kind of like, you can think of some of them as like a hot glue gun, right? You push material out and it melts and it deposits onto something and you build it up into a certain shape and then you have your object. We were trying to improve the properties of those materials by using organic synthesis. So that lab was interesting because I had worked in an organic lab. I felt confident with being able to do synthesis, but now I have these 3D printers in front of me that I have no idea how they work or how to use them or anything, and neither did my boss. So it was really, that was really a challenging moment and a big moment of growth to be able to go out and look up how to program a 3D printer, look up how to repair it, or be able to move into a field that I just had no clue about. By the time I left, I would say I'm pretty well versed in that subject. So it was very important there to be able to take all of the training that I had and take all of that knowledge, but then also be able to apply the skills that I learned in how to learn. I know a lot of people say that when you're in college, you're learning how to learn, but it's true. To be able to go out and look things up on your own and be able to apply them in a new way is really the basis of science. And it's what makes a really strong scientist, in my opinion. So while I was at UT Dallas, I worked on my 3D printing, worked on my projects, got some publications. That was really great. I got to attend a conference in New Orleans, the American Chemical Society, the national conference. So that was really exciting. It was huge. I presented a poster there. I was able to draw on my experience from the C-STEP conference. So I just felt like everything was moving forward and everything was falling into place. In the summer of 2019, my boss, he suggested to me that I apply for this thing called the BEST Symposium, and I had no idea what that was. Well, the company that I work at now, Dow, the chemical company, they have a symposium for minority students who are towards the end of their PhD or recent graduates, and it's called Building Engineering and Science Talent. And what they want to do is bring these minority students into into Dow and give them a chance to see what is industry about, what is the company about, and they actually ended up, for me, using it as a recruiting tool. So this was really cool because in science now, there's a big push to have diversity. Most scientists don't look like me. Most scientists look very different, maybe completely opposite from me. So just to have that community, there were 26 of us, to come in and be able to see other people who are kind of in my position and also, you know, trying to pursue science at higher levels was really encouraging. So while I was there, I learned a lot about the company. I got to do some more networking, and that actually resulted in an interview for me. So I was invited back, I interviewed with the company, and in my third year of graduate school, they offered me a full-time position for after I graduate. So for me, that was super helpful because now I don't have to do the job search at the end of graduation, right? Everyone always struggles with that, you know, what am I going to do next? That was in the bag, and that was so awesome, and I'm so thankful for that. Another thing that was good about that is it actually pushed me to graduate a year early. So I started my program in 2016, and I completed the program in August of 2020, which was super exciting. I'm a young PhD. I graduated at 25, so that was great because I got my job before I got kicked off of my parents' insurance, which was important for me. But to be able to have that job offer and have that experience was amazing. And again, to me, that came through networking, really putting myself out there while I was at the conference, not being afraid to ask questions, really trying to have conversations and just genuinely learn about what was going on there. I think that was really helpful in that process for me. So now I'm here and I live in Bay City, Michigan. This is my home apartment office. And I now work at the Dow Chemical Company as a senior research specialist. And I'm in the consumer solutions area. So for me, that means my job function is kind of in between the very technical side of chemistry and also client-facing interactions. So I'm basically the liaison between the two. I go into the lab, I work with some materials, I take the materials and I use them in the applications they're intended for so we can understand how they function and then be able to take that knowledge and give it to clients and say, hey, here's a material that might work for your application, or hey, you're already using our material but you're struggling, here's how we can help you. So it's very important in this role to have good communication skills, which definitely was developed during all of my research at CSTEP and going to conferences and doing different presentations. It's important to be able to be personable and have those soft skill interactions, which I feel like I really developed in my job in between graduate school and my undergrad. So to be able to have those two skills as well as the technical knowledge, it's the trifecta. So I won't say I know everything about this job because I don't. I got here 1 month ago, so I'm still learning. I'm very much learning right now. But that's just kind of my journey and how I was able to get all the way from being that, 15-year-old, I don't care about science, into a very technical role at one of the largest companies in my field. So that's my story. I hope you guys have questions. I really do. Please feel free to ask me anything. And yeah.
Well, thank you, Danielle. That is quite the journey. So in 10 years, you went from I like music and I like performance to I'm a bona fide chemist. Wow.
Yeah.
On that journey, and it was some journey. How important was OCC in that journey? And within that question, were there any professors at OCC that were particularly instrumental to your success?
Yes and yes. OCC was my foundation. It was my building block. Before attending that school, I really did not have a knowledge of science or how to progress or how to go about any of that. And I really credit a lot of that to CSTEP because those were the people who said, hey, research is important. Hey, here's this conference. We want to take you to it. They paid for everything. And they really gave me that exposure to be able to fall in love with science and find what it is that I ultimately wanted to do. In terms of professors, I had, I really wish I remembered his name. It was a math teacher. And he was so great because math is not my strong suit. And I took Calc 2 with him and everything made so much sense. And then in terms of chemistry, Dr. Denise Gigante, I'm not sure if she's still there or not. But while I was there, she was like the toughest professor ever. Everyone was like, oh, I don't want to take her class. She's going to be so hard. She's really hard on grading. But when I went into my graduate level courses, I could still hear her saying the certain words, walking us through mechanisms and different things. She gave such a strong foundation in science, especially in organic chemistry. And she was very real with us students. You know, if you had questions about how things were graded, she would let you know, whether that was good or bad. And she was also there to provide just a ton of support. She was super knowledgeable. So.
Now, something that you mentioned several times was for your career, the importance of networking. And that may seem a little bit far off in the distance for some of our students, because right, they're just going to class. Who are they going to network with? For that time in school, and you certainly spent your fair share of time in school, how important did you think networking with your professors was? And sort of in hindsight, what differences did that make to have that good rapport and to keep in touch with them?
Oh gosh, networking with professors, that is the greatest place to start, because as you're building your network, you then can kind of use other people's network. It's like 6 degrees of separation, right? So if you have a good rapport with your professor and you say, hey, I'm really interested in, I don't know, physics, and you know, I don't really know who to talk to, but I want to do research. They can talk to their other professor friends or, you know, colleagues that they've had in the past and say, hey, I have this student, they're really strong, they're super motivated, and they want to pursue physics. Do you have anything available, or do you know any resources that I can provide to them? So even right now, although you're not, you know, going off and curing cancer or anything, you most certainly can get a head start in your career, or just expose yourself to different things by, you know, being open, being upfront, being trying to pursue those things by even just using your professors, the people you have classes with right now. Networking it can start anywhere, and it can be on any scale.
Well, there's a call to action for our students. Something that we've seen at the collegiate level, and certainly you in the professional world, things like Zoom and Teams, right? Virtual meetings. No one's meeting in person right now. Do you think those are here to stay in the business world? And do you think students should become more comfortable with these platforms as they might replace things like those face-to-face conferences that were so important for your journey?
Yeah, I definitely think that they can be here for a while. In the business world, especially for my position, there's a lot of travel associated, and sometimes you'll travel to actually see processes happen, and that kind of can't be replaced. But just to have a quick meeting to say, hey, you know, these are the ideas that we have, or these are the things that we're looking for, it saves a lot of money to be able to do it from home. It's far more efficient, cost-wise and time-wise. So I think that this will have an impact on that. In terms of getting comfortable with the platforms, yeah, I would. That was a tough transition that I had in grad school. You know, we were using this because I was still pursuing my PhD in March when the pandemic started. But having been in my job now, we use several different platforms, and there was a little bit of a learning curve to get used to that. So, you know, I just think in general, as technology progresses, it's really good to just kind of keep up with what's going on so you can be the most effective and the most marketable you that you can be.
Great. One question, probably my favorite question yet is, and you've mentioned this, as a woman of color in your field, which is by all standards a male-dominated profession, do you feel that you need to prove yourself, or when you walk into a room, what does that look like?
Yeah. It's still to this day, it can be intimidating, especially now. I'm a small fish in a big pond. But I think what's important about, you know, that is, one, you're not where you're at for no reason. You've had to go through all of the same things everyone else did, and sometimes more, because I've had personal experiences where people have thought less of me or tried to hold me back or do something that would hinder my progress. And you just have to say, hey, I know what I know and I deserve to be here. And you can't be afraid to speak up. A lot of times, you know, we'll have meetings and someone might say something that I think is not correct, or it just doesn't quite make sense to me. And I've had several instances where, you know, I'll raise my hand or I'll speak up and say, hey, you know, I was thinking about it this way. Are you sure that, you know, that's correct? And there would be at least 4 other people in the room with the same question, or either that or it would cause the person to have to think about what they're doing in a different way. So it's always, as long as it's constructive, it's always beneficial to speak out, but being in those situations, you definitely have to step out of your comfort zone and just know that, hey, you belong here and you're here for a reason and you have everything to contribute.
Now, you mentioned you grew up on the South Side and you lived there until you left Syracuse. Now, coming from what people would look at and say a disadvantaged area, and quite frankly, Central New York as a whole, are there certain stigmas that come along with enrolling in support services like the C-STEP program or extra tutoring, et cetera? And what is your advice to students who are eligible for these programs and who might be hesitant?
Well, first, my advice is do it, sign up for them because they're so helpful. But I don't think that there's a huge stigma. Maybe some people might, say things around it like, oh, this is like affirmative action or something outlandish, but really, if you look at some of the top students at school, I know that I was in class with people, specifically in organic chemistry, they had straight A's in the class and they were going to tutoring. That's the reason that they're successful, because they're getting that extra help. So whether you feel like you need it and you want to go, you should go. If you don't feel like you need it, you should still go because it will help solidify things for you. And if you're super solid and you pass the class, then you should tutor. And so you can help somebody else. So there's really stages to it, but there's no shame in asking for help in anything.
Well, what a great message. And certainly asking for help gets you where you are, right? And so if anybody wants to emulate that path, absolutely enroll in all the tutoring and in all the programs. Now, you mentioned that you had a few different mentors along your journey. Have you been a mentor to anybody, either in the workplace or as a graduate student?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, because of the path that I've taken and having so many people help me, outreach has been a major part of every step of my way. So when I was working as an IH technician, I was able to go back to ESF and actually do a small part of a lecture on hearing conservation as they had an environmental health program that they just started. In graduate school, so much outreach. We went to public libraries and we did science demonstrations. We mentored young girls and young women in science. So having them come in and doing like week-long programs with them, as well as some undergraduate students that I had while I was in my PhD. So when you're in your PhD and you're doing research undergrads, the same way I went into a lab and was working with someone else, I was able to do the same. So I think in a total, I had 6 undergraduate students. Some of them, I've written letters of recommendation for. They have jobs in science now. One went to pharmacy school. So it's definitely important for me personally to give back because I know that's the only way that I made it here.
Well, and then brings us full circle back to networking, right? They learned from you, they've used you as a resource, and you help them get to where they need to be, which again just speaks to building that network right from first semester in college. You may not think there's a need for a network, but look where your network helped to bring you. That was all the questions that our audience had. I always like to ask the same question, which is looking back now, right? You have hindsight on your side, 2020, looking back. Is there anything you would change?
I would change my motivation in the early years of college because I was learning, I was in class to get good grades, right? That's what I was trying to do. And that was not helpful for me. I've definitely had to go back and relearn subjects. But if you really look at learning as you're gaining something out of this, you are growing as a person, you're growing in your knowledge base, you tend to approach your classes differently. You don't feel like, oh man, I have to sit through this hour-and-a-half chemistry lecture today. You're like, hey, I read ahead in the book a little bit and I didn't understand this topic. So like, what can you tell me about it? Or what can I do to keep myself interested in these subjects? Granted, there's always going to be something that you don't like, and you have to push through those, but just changing my approach to learning, I think that definitely would be the main thing that I would have changed.
If only we could all go back and change our motivation. Here's a more personal question. How often do you get back to the area, and what does Central New York mean to you now that you've been gone for a few years?
Okay, so I was back last November, like September, November, actually to speak at, I gave a department seminar at ESF and also Syracuse University. So that was great to be back on campus and, see all of the old things. But to be honest, I don't really make it back up to Syracuse frequently. My family, they've relocated to Virginia now. So Virginia is kind of my home base, but I do miss Central New York a lot, especially when I was in Texas. Texas, it's warm all the time, but you don't really get seasonal changes. There's not the same sense of community because at that point I was a transplant, so it's not like somewhere that I grew up with or my old friends were at or I had a ton of memories. So yeah, I definitely miss that. I will say living in Michigan now, the weather is pretty similar, so I'm seeing a lot of similarities that remind me of home. So I'm sure I'll be making some more trips to Syracuse soon. Well, once it's safe.
Yeah, key word, once it's safe. And I was going to mention you're now back in the snow belt of the north. Well, Danielle, thank you very, very, very much for being with us today. You were our last speaker for the semester. So this finishes up our series of 6 seminars, but we are working hard at putting together our series for the spring of 2021. So keep an eye out for dates and speakers. We're hoping to announce those in January, and we look forward to having many of you back with us in the spring. Thank you.